This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today I am honored to have Matthew Stibbe on the show, and he is a serial entrepreneur, and he's the founder and CEO of Intelligent Games, which is a computer gaming company. And he's a huge fan of Legos, which I love. I think it's awesome. And also, he's an author at a website that he manages called Geekboss, which is right up our alley because we talk about modern management and all kinds of cool stuff. He's also the CEO at Articulate Marketing, which we'll talk about a little bit as well. But with all that being said, Matthew, welcome to the show.
I'm delighted to be here, John. Thank you for having me.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about kind of your how you got to where you are today and what that journey's been like for you.
Well, my geek journey sort of runs through a childhood, teenage obsession with space. I was a member of the British Interplanetary Society at the age of 13. My father was an engineer, so maybe I inherited that from him. But my management journey, I started a computer games company when I was 18. I designed and programmed a couple of games while I was at university. And I ran that for 10 years, as you said, Intelligent Games. So I was designing, programming, and then as the business grew and we got to sort of 50, 60, 70 people, doing a lot of management of developers and designers. I sold that business in 2000 without really any idea what I was going to do next, just that I wasn't going to do that anymore. So I sort of became a bit of a dilettante writer. I got a pilot's license and enjoyed, a few years of doing this and that. But in my spare time, while I was sort of after the sale of Intelligent Games, I ended up writing for Wired and Popular Science and some UK management magazines. Not so well known as those two, but and I got the writing bug. And so I ended up starting Articulate Marketing in 2003. We still are working for technology companies, business to business, B2B tech companies. So companies you might have heard of like Microsoft and Hewlett Packard Enterprise and Dell Technologies, and a lot of smaller, very ambitious businesses who would like to be Microsoft, HP, or Dell Technologies at some point in the future. So that's sort of my journey. It's aviation, space, computer games, Lego, and then marketing for tech companies. I don't know how to join all that up, but somehow I make a living at it. And the Lego connection, by the way, well, you say Legos, we say Lego, you say tomato, I say tomato. So sorry about the two people divided by a common language. But when I was at Intelligent Games, we were developing games for Lego, and I designed a game called Lego Loco. So that's the Lego connection.
Awesome. Yeah. And it's amazing how things have advanced over the years and how all those things kind of come together today. I know one of my 4-year-old's favorite TV show is Lego Star Wars. So you get a little bit of the planets and a little bit of the Legos all put together.
Don't tell anybody, but it's one of my favorite shows too.
I'll keep that between us and everybody else listening.
I just joking aside, I thought the Lego movie was just done beautifully. I mean, the animation and so on, but they managed to talk to kids, but they also anyone who has sort of grew up with Lego or made a living at it. There was something there for sort of adult fans of Lego too. I think they do a very good job with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something that's entertaining enough for me to watch with him and be able to kind of like enjoy it and not just be like some of the Barney shows that's not fun. That one's really entertaining for adults and kids. So that's cool.
And what's sort of, sorry, if I could riff off that a little bit, forgive me for what's very interesting about Lego, because I've seen the company from the inside a little bit because we worked with them for a few years. How can I put it? They have a really strong set of values about what it means to be Lego. I mean, what they do and what they don't do, and how they want to work and what they think is appropriate and what isn't. And at the same time, there's this incredible business focus, and the people who are running it are very, very good at running a business. It's not all fun and games, making fun and games, right? And I deeply respect that, because I certainly, when I was running the games company, people just assumed that you're sitting around having crazy ideas about how to make a fantastic game. And successful businesses in that sector, in any sector, there's this cultural depth, and then there's rigorous, diligent, brilliant execution of being a business. And I think you need both. And I think there's a lesson in that for anybody who's out there trying to, whether you're making, I don't know, remote control alarm systems or, dog food or something. If you can find that deep passion and connect it to, well-run business.
So what's a way that maybe tech leaders today can kind of do that? How can we find what is our company's niche, or what is it, the product that we're working on, and kind of tie that into a passion for each one of the team members? Because everybody's got to have different passions. Everybody's got different things that they're inspired by and that they like. And luckily, being in technology, most of my employees, it's tech, so that they like what they do. But how can we bring that together as leaders?
That's I think one of the attributes of a geeky mindset is a delight in kind of problem solving and a delight in understanding. So that's something that I find very motivating, and some of my more technical colleagues find very motivating, certainly in the computer games days. But that's for those type of people. But the trick, I think, to answer your question is, if you can find the motivation for different people that drives them. So geeky minded, nerdy minded, in the best possible sense, they have their triggers and excitements. Other people have different motivations. I'm blessed to work with a team of professional copywriters, effectively business journalists at Articulate Marketing. And the thing that motivates them on some level is this joy of expression, finding the right way to say something, finding the right narrative structure that lures a reader in, answers their question, controls suspense, delivers the informational payload of the content in a clever way. So there's a sort of a creative, artistic expression of their talent that motivates them. And other people have other motivations. Our CFO, I don't bless her, she loves spreadsheets. She likes understanding the data, right? I am not a good person with spreadsheets. She was criticizing me earlier because my sales forecast, she said, my sales forecast is much better looking than yours. And I said, I know, because I'm a writer. I'm just trying to work this stuff out, right? It's a tool for me. It doesn't motivate me. I have no geek joy in a spreadsheet with sales forecasts, but I'm capable of using it as a tool. So, sorry, that's a very long, rambling way of saying I think the secret to engaging people is to find the levers that they find motivating. I think one further thought on this, I'm reading the book Traction, which is about the entrepreneurial operating system. So I guess I'm an unusual podcast guest because I'm coming along to shill for someone else's book. But he talks about putting the right people in the right seats. And I think one of the other things that a leader has to do, and this is very hard, is if people haven't engaged with their passion, if they haven't found something satisfying and rewarding about the work they do for you, they might not be the right person for the job. And it's depressing to realize that not everybody is right to come work in your business. So part of it is finding the right people and then finding the right way to motivate or engage them.
Yeah, I like what you said about the finding that right person and making sure that you have the right person, but also the right person in the right seat on the bus. Because sometimes you can have the right person, but they're not in the right role. I've had a person that worked for me in a support role, doing support where they answer the phones, help people with computer problems and things like that. But really, that person's right job probably would have been more like project management. So you had the right person, but you had them in the wrong spot. And sometimes it's as a leader, you have to really get to know your people and figure out where the right spot is for them. And if you don't do that, soon enough, you might lose them before you get that opportunity. So just kind of caution some of the listeners out there, get to know your people, make sure they're in the right spot, because every now and then you might miss out on a really good person, the right person, because you had them in the wrong spot.
And that provokes a couple of thoughts in my mind. The first one is hire for attitude, right? For cultural fit, and not necessarily because you think they are going to come in and do exactly that job in exactly the way you want. One of the hardest things is to find somebody who is, perfectly square peg for the perfect square slot that you have in the business. And in my experience at Articulate, the management team here, with the exception of our CFO, have all been promoted from within. So they didn't start as leaders, managers of the business. They were a couple of intern copywriters, a junior designer when they were first hired, now head of studio and head of client services, head of sales, all promoted from within. And so that's very attractive. That's very nice. That shows people in the business that there's a promotion path and so on. The critical thing here is, I don't know if you've heard of the Peter Principle, which is where people get promoted up to and then beyond the limits of their competence. You have to train people, you have to support them and encourage them and develop them. But if they're not in the right role, sometimes you have to say, actually, this isn't working for you. I want you to take a step back into the role where you were comfortable and be good at that. Or I want you to have an opportunity to take a sideways step into another role. And I have a couple of people, and I won't name names to spare their blushes, who have moved from one thing to another thing to find the exact right thing. So although I said earlier, sometimes people aren't the right fit for your business, it doesn't automatically mean, and you're very right to say this, it doesn't automatically mean you should fire them. It might mean they need to be somewhere else in the organization. And I think the most successful position change for us, my personal assistant, is now our chief happiness officer, and is I won't say a better chief happiness officer than a personal assistant, but she's perfect for that job, and it was exactly the right role for her. So I think if you can make that transition work and help people find their right niche and give them the option to step back or step aside or step sideways. We had a very interesting example of this, because one of the hardest roles in an agency is client relationship management, client account management. It needs, knowledge and diplomacy and firmness and so on. And we've had a couple of people step into that role and then step back out of it again. And as long as they they're willing to give it a good try, you support them, and then they find it's not right for them, that works very well. And I think that's a very respectful place to be for a company and its employees.
Yeah. So how is it as a leader that you help people understand that it's okay to step back out of it? Because a lot of people will feel like they're a failure if they're, not achieving everything they're supposed to achieve and not super satisfied in that role. How is it that you've made them comfortable enough to say, hey, look, I thought this was right for me. I got into it. I realized it's not. I'm ready to go back, and make them feel okay for that.
Yeah, it's a very hard thing. And you're right. The fear of failure or the admission of failure. The way that I've done it in a couple of cases that I think has worked very well is to say, I'd like you to try this role for a period of time. Treat it as like a rotation in the army. You're going to go and do this for 6 months, a year. And if it's not right, it's a natural progression that you're going to come out of it again. In other words, the default is leave, not stay. And that way they are committing to enough time to kind of really understand the role. They're not necessarily dealing with the stressful first few months only. They have a chance to grow in it and experiment with it. I'm getting some return on the risk and investment I'm making in developing them. And if certainly if that first few months can be on a probationary basis, or I mean, you don't want to call it quite that, like an experimental basis. If they step back, they don't lose any money. They've done the job for example, if it looks like a promotion and it comes with a pay rise, maybe they do it for 3 months without the pay rise on a acting or an interim or a temporary basis, so that it's very clear that, to everybody, look, that acting account manager, and they can step back, or they commit for 6 months. And if they want to step out of it at that point, we have to find a similarly senior role for them to step into. So it's a little bit, it's one step forward, two steps forward, three steps forward. What you really want to avoid is the situation where they feel like they've been set up to fail and they see no way out, and the only option they've got at that point is either to continue to fail in the job or quit, and then you lose a valuable person.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen before, where companies will set up like an interim CIO type role, and the person steps into it. They think that this is it. I'm doing this, and then next thing you know, the company opens up a job search and they want them to interview other CIOs, and they're like, "Wait a minute, I thought I was going this path, and now I'm not." And it gets a little tricky at that point. So it's kind of hard to kind of delicately balance and walk that line of interim process versus full time.
Well, I've been talking about scenarios where they've had the option to step back. Of course, the other version of that is, you promote them into it, and you they think they're doing all right, and you don't.
Yeah,
that's a harder conversation. But I think the same set of rules apply. You can have an honest conversation, or it shouldn't come. This is the golden rule, of course. Nothing should come as a surprise, right? They should be 6 months in, and they should be pretty clear why you're saying, there's some bits that are good here, but this isn't quite working for the business. And I think your strengths are such that we should put you somewhere else. And they should go, yeah, and that's the conversation we've been having for the last 3 months. And we tried all the things that we could do to avert this. But yes, you're right. I agree. And I think I would be happier over here, and I can contribute better to the business. It's hard though. People's stuff is hard, right?
Yeah, that's the hardest part in my opinion, and I hate the fact that they call it soft skills, because those are the hardest ones for me,
Yeah.
And I love the way you said that nothing should be a surprise. And even though, sometimes I do my best to have, regular one-on-ones, to talk to my team on a regular basis, I always feel like there's always something on that performance review or something that comes up that seems to be a surprise. How can we as leaders kind of be more transparent so that we're not giving those surprises?
Well, okay. There's being surprised and giving surprises, yes. Right? I think being surprised, I had a really good example of this today. We have a recently hired manager, and she's very, very good in one-to-ones in sort of talking through what her agenda is, or what her, I'm working on this and this and this. Does that sound okay to you, Matthew? And I think my priorities are like this. What I like very much about that, and why I'm bringing this up, is I think that people in one-to-ones, the junior in the relationship needs to treat it as a very serious part of the relationship. It's managing your boss and engaging your boss in conversation, so you understand their priorities and what they need, and they understand what you're doing and what you need. That's a critical way of avoiding giving surprises, right? And I think that juniors who come to the one-to-one conversation, I'm talking about people in that it's a hierarchical relationship. It's a boss talking to somebody in a subordinate. The junior has a real responsibility to make those conversations work. It's not enough just to turn up and be told what to do. And so that's thing number one. Thing number two, I think the way that managers and leaders avoid surprises, easy to say this, of course, is around being very articulate and clear and consistent about the culture and the intentions that they have for the business and that they have for the role. One of the things that I try to do, and I think do more now than I used to, is drafting remits, briefs for the job. This is what I think is important right now. This is what I would really like you to be thinking about. This is expressing problem statements. This is what I think is not working and what needs to be improved. Not necessarily problems about the employee, but about kind of what I need them to work on. Mm-hmm. So in the one-to-one relationship, I think being clear about the problems and the briefs. And I think in the company context, we're doing a lot of work at the moment because it's the end of our financial year in 2 weeks, planning for next year and defining, setting OKRs, objectives and key results, defining company level goals, the guidelines, the departmental remits, like who is responsible for what, all that traction stuff. It's getting that right. It will help then be when you give feedback to somebody, look, I needed you to do this and you're not. Can you do more of it? Oh yeah, fair enough. You did tell me that, and you repeatedly told me that, and I was part of the discussion when we were talking about it. I think that work, that intention, briefing, goals, values, conversation, that's how leaders make that, avoid surprises for their subordinates. Ideally. Easy to say, right?
Harder to do. Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you a side note. That you mentioned OKRs, and are you guys using OKRs like as a organization, and then departments and then individuals, or just as the higher level? Because I know some companies go all the way down to the individual level OKRs, and other people still use goals for individual levels. I wonder how you guys are doing it, what's working well and what's not.
Yeah. So what we do, and then I can talk more about it and more about why we do this. What we do is OKRs for the company. So there's annual, quarterly company OKRs, and there are departmental team level OKRs, annual and quarterly. We don't do it at an individual level. There's a different engagement model and documentation process for one-to-ones and for individuals that talks about development goals and objectives and so on for them. There are quite a lot of reasons for that, but the main one is OKRs are really hard.
They are. And I found that whenever you seem to drill it down too far, it becomes more work than the value you get out of it.
Right. I mean, some people on an individual level claim to, and I'm sure they do, get a lot of value out of using OKRs for themselves or for their individual. And clearly a lot of companies do OKRs right down to an individual level and see value in doing that. I read a very interesting article in Harvard Business Review that basically said OKRs are for teams, not for individuals. And I found the arguments very compelling, not only because they were well made, but we tried doing it at an individual level and it was really boggy and awful and difficult. And
yeah, it seems so hard to manage.
Yeah. Yeah. And not everybody is in a job that lends itself to that.
Correct.
That particular formulation or that particular, they don't have enough data that they can demonstrate progress towards an objective. I mean, certainly in a marketing agency like Articulate, we use a lot of project management tools, and we have a lot of task management and, Gantt charts and things like that. Well, less Gantt charts now. We're mostly operating on an agile sprint model, but there are other ways of managing people's day-to-day work and measuring it, I think, rather than the OKR model. Also, I think OKRs have a very sort of nice value in sort of aligning team activity and kind of giving it building team cohesion. And this is where we're all headed. We need to be doing this. It sets a nice framework for individual objectives and conversations around individual goals. But I'm, for me, not convinced that it works at an individual level.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I like them for teams because it kind of gives you that overall, why. Simon Sinek always says start with why. It kind of gives you that why of where you're going to go as a team and why you're doing what you're doing and where your part contributes to that greater good, that greater success. When you get down to an individual level, it seems like the value is not quite as big, and you can just do a goal, a simple, to achieve similar results.
And I think at the heart of that whole why OKRs are hard at a team level or company level is the gravitational pull of turning them into a task list right? It's very easy to express a task as, we did X, tick, hooray, 100% completion of our OKR. And when they're done well, key results measure progress towards an ambitious objective. And setting those ambitious objectives, setting the KPIs to measure progress towards them and achievements and so on, takes a lot of work. I mean, there's that old joke about, I think it was Mark Twain who said, "I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." To get pithy, data-driven, smart OKRs, we're finding it takes weeks and weeks of work and conversation and discussion. How are you measuring that? How are you defining that? And everybody is coming with their own sort of set of expectations. So what actually the OKR process is doing, it's not so much that you end up with so many objectives and key results. It is a mechanism for building a shared understanding of the objectives and key results. It's the output is a page or two of documentation, but it's probably documenting weeks and weeks of thought, hours and hours of discussion, and that's very valuable. And coming back to our early point, if you've done it right, it is also a remedy against surprises. It's a mechanism for clarity and communication.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about communication, so you mentioned that you got the bug for writing and you started a blog called Geekboss. Can you tell me a little bit about where that name came from, why you're doing that, and where your ideas for the articles come from?
So one of our values at Articulate is that we share what we learn. So I've always been blogging and writing, and now the whole agency is involved in that endeavor. So we have a blog on Articulate Marketing where we talk about marketing stuff. There was quite a lot of material on the Articulate Marketing blog that was not really about marketing. It was things that I had written that I thought were interesting at one point or another. So that Geekboss came out of the need to find a home for the thoughts of Matthew that were not about marketing. That was one impulse, because I've been running that blog since 2006. The other impulse, well, the name, that's a funny story. I was driving through Romania with my wife. We were on our way north of Bucharest, and on this very, very long stretch of pretty nondescript road. So she was driving and I was just on my phone sort of randomly doing things. And I was telling her the story of how I had built in Slack. I don't know if you remember the game Zork, where you have, you type in like go north, take sword, kill dragon, right?
Yes, I do.
Those sort of text adventure games. And somebody had published an API into Zork, the Zork interpreter language, that you could effectively play Zork in Slack by connecting it to this thing. So I had done that. So all the young people in Articulate were playing Zork in Slack, and they had, most of them had never seen a text adventure game or interactive fiction. They were used to running around in 3D shooting at things. So that was a little thing that was happening in the business. And I was telling my wife as we were driving through Romania about how I'd done this, and I was getting very enthusiastic about it. And she turned to me and she said, "Matthew, you're such a geek boss." And I went, "Oh, that's quite a good name." And I immediately, because this is the other thing I do, I immediately went on to a domain name registry thing to see if I could buy geekboss.com, because when I hear an interesting name like that, I always try and buy it. And I ended up buying geekboss.com. And so the name, the domain name, and the need for something all came together en route through Romania. So that's how it started. That was a couple of years ago. How do I come up with ideas for it? Now it's really driven by problems, questions that I'm facing at work, and what I'm moving towards as a model for writing for Geekboss is not so much going, I'm an expert, I have all the answers, you've got to do this. And much more like, I've got a problem and I'm trying to figure it out, and this happened and I'm tried this and I'm working on that. I think there's a real tendency, which I have had for a long time as a writer, and blogs generally have, of like pretending to omniscience. Or I know every answer to every question and I'm an expert. And I There's a lot of that on Geekboss, a lot of things I do know about, but I would like Geekboss to be working out how to be a better leader and a better manager in public. That's my intention for it.
That's very similar to the way I started this podcast, was to one, to connect with cool people and talk to people like you and other people that I can learn from and become a better leader, but also to hold myself accountable to my team. So at the time I got really into leadership because I was a new manager. My team had a lot of turnover, and it's mostly because I was a bad boss. I didn't know what I was doing, and I was kind of screwing things up a little bit. And I got into figuring out that I wanted to be a better leader. I wanted to figure out how I can do this and also make sure that I was doing it. So if I get on a public show out there and I can talk about the things that I'm doing and struggling with and things that I'm doing well with, my team can listen to that and say, yes, you are doing that, or no, you're not. And they can hold me accountable to the things that I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it started out kind of in a very similar way, just to, be a better leader, learn the things that I can learn, but also help people out that are in the same boat or maybe just a step behind where I am.
Yeah. We I find that the idea of expressing vulnerability and ignorance and stupidity very challenging, right? But I'm learning that actually it's an expression of humility and willingness to learn, and expressing a little bit of vulnerability, can be quite humanizing, and it gives people a chance to tell you what they think, right? Gives people a bit of space. Look,
Yes.
I know I do this and I'm not particularly good at it and I'm trying to get better. Allows them to come and go, well, if you want to be better, you could do this, or when you do that, or I'm thinking about, and that's a very constructive place to be. I think certainly being any kind of manager or leader, that the tendency, the temptation to pretend you know everything and that you're fully in control all the time is very strong. And if you're an entrepreneur like I am and you're running your own business, even more so. As I said at the beginning of our conversation today, the posture of leadership is calm presence, right? You don't want to scare the troops, but you also need to encourage and motivate and kind of create a safe place for them to be honest with you. Like everything, it's very easy to say. It's a constant work in progress. And Geekboss is for me partly where I do that work.
Yeah, I think
It sounds to me you have a very similar experience with your podcast.
Yeah, it is. It's where I can, hopefully, when I talk to someone like you, I want to get something that is interesting for the listeners, obviously, but also that helps me. Because if it helps me, it's probably going to help at least 10%, 50% of the audience that are out there that could have the similar type issues that they're dealing with and struggles that they have. So, like going back to asking you questions about, how do you help someone know when to step back? Those are things that I could use and helps me out. And all these little things that you're saying along the way are things that I can say, how can I use that in this situation? And I think it's really beneficial. So yeah, I think we started in the same place, and and that's the whole purpose of doing this is, not just to benefit me, but to benefit the listeners as well.
Well, one of the most useful articles I wrote was how to understand what your boss is thinking. But especially me, because my mind works in particular ways. Well, I suppose everybody's does in their own way. And I wanted to give people a user manual, or like an operating manual for working with me. Look, here are some things you need to know. I I was inspired by that, but there's a fabulous blog called Rands in Repose, which is written by, I think his first name is Michael, or Steve, and his surname is Lopp. And he's written a few books as well. He's also a techie software development guy who moved into management and blogs about it. He wrote an article about dating geeks, and I gave it to my wife when we started dating. I was like, look, here's the operating manual. When I'm doing this, it's because of this. I don't know if she completely absorbed all the information, but I thought, well, I'll write a user manual for me as a boss, and hopefully encourage my staff and my colleagues to forgive my idiosyncrasies.
I think that's brilliant. And, one of the articles you had on there was like how to ask someone to be your mentor. And I think that's awesome, because I've had people ask me like a totally wrong way where, hey, will you help me out with this? And here's the times that I'm available. Oh, you're asking me, you should probably be more accommodating to my time, not, that I have to do it on your time. And there's little things like that that just kind of drove me a little crazy. And, some of them were a learning experience for that person. And they were able to say, oh, I get it, and then correct course. And other people, I don't think they ever got it. Maybe maybe I'm not a good mentor. I couldn't teach them, but I love the way that you put that. You put your do's and don'ts in certain ways that make a lot of sense.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because that's one of the old blog posts that came over from the old Articulate blog. And when I wrote it, I had been sort of rather badly abused by somebody who wanted me to be their mentor, but sort of rather assumed they were doing me a huge favor by asking me. Anyway, I won't get into that story. But thinking about how to be a good leader and how to be a good manager, I think finding a mentor is really valuable. I think one of the best things that happened to me in the last 18 months, really, I've been working with him, is that I found an outstanding and wonderful man to mentor me and help me reflect on how I was managing people and running my business, to the extent now that he actually mentors most of the management team at Articulate. But that was a complicated relationship to negotiate and to discuss. And, how do you make it worth somebody's while? Not everybody wants to go out of their way or give of their time. But one of the things I like about John is the entire time I've known him, he's always been very supportive. And what happened with the mentoring relationship was it just formalized something that had been quite a long-standing part of our friendship and our working together. Mm-hmm. But if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a manager, if you're a leader, it can be quite lonely. There are things that you can't talk to your team about, right? Pay reviews. It's just, and there's a formal right way to have some conversations that mean you can't brainstorm them in advance. And having somebody else to go and be able to do that with is really, really valuable. So that was a strong recommendation, actually, for anyone who hasn't got a mentor. But ask them the right way.
Correct. Yes, I agree 100%. I think that's one of the things that, at least when I was in school, they didn't teach us that. They didn't teach you to go get a mentor or anything like that. And then you get out into the business world, and sometimes you feel, I was lucky enough to have a company where when I first became a manager that offered mentors to, so like my first mentor was, I was a, IT manager, and my first mentor was an SVP in sales, actually. And he became my mentor, and it was great to have that kind of mentor that was somebody in a different department, in a different area that I could kind of learn a little bit about. And he was able to help guide me in ways like, you're doing a great job, of getting your projects done, but nobody knows what you're doing. How do you market your team? How do you, show what you're doing outside? And gave me some of these like little tips that, even if I probably would have had an IT manager being my mentor, I might not have gotten that. I might not have gotten how to sell my team, how to sell the work that we're doing up the channel, how to promote the ideas that we're having internally outside of technology, so that our team can be known not just within our area but throughout the whole company. And I was really fortunate for that.
I think in some organizations, they really formalize the role of mentor and recognize it and reward it and encourage it. I mean, certainly, John, my mentor, used to be in the Army, and that's an organization, the British Army, that is, you kind of, if you're not mentoring somebody, you're doing something wrong. It's a bad thing. And my wife used to work for GE. General Electric, and in the good old days, and they were very, very deliberate about mentoring people, and particularly high flyers like her. And I think that's something as a leader that I could do better, and encouraging members of my team to mentor people, and indeed mentoring people myself. That's an interesting reflection, actually, John. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things that helped me get to where I am today was having somebody, and it was actually my mentor that told me. I think I had 2 people quit in the same day, and he asked me the right questions to make me realize it myself that it was probably my fault. Where I kept initially I was like, oh, they just make more money in the city, that's why they went up there to for their job working for the bank or something, and Although that
Well,
may be true,
I
that's
make
not
no
what it was.
criticism of you. I didn't know you then, but you seem like not a person that people would quit on today. But there's an old saying, isn't there, that people don't leave companies, they leave bosses.
Yep, and that's exactly what he told me. And he said, yeah, they may make $5,000 more at the bank, but that's not enough to quit your job, especially if you have a boss you like. And I was like, bingo, you're right. And at that time, I was focused more on making sure the projects got done and not that the people grew. And it was just had to shift my mindset a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we have some very, very bad role models of leadership in the world at the moment. I mean, especially at egotistical model of leadership is not a helpful one. And I think there needs to be a more championing of emotional intelligence in leadership, and kind of the idea of servant leadership, I think, is a very interesting one. You're not a leader to flatter your own vanity, but actually to nurture and develop the people who you're responsible for. Again, one of those things that's more honored in the breach than in the observance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think servant leadership is one of those areas that we need to talk more about, when it comes to management training and things like that. So I think that's a great thing there. So Matthew, man, I really enjoyed talking to you. How can people find out more about the things that you're working on, connect with you, and learn more about some of the things that you're learning along the way?
Well, go have a look at geekboss.com. That's where my management leadership thoughts, such as they are, that's where they exist. For any advice about marketing, there's a lot of resource and material on articulate marketing in the blog and in the webinar pages there. And it's all free. There's nobody's trying to sell you anything. This is just share what we learn.
Awesome. And one thing for the tech leaders out there that may think, oh, I don't need to know marketing. You do. You really need to market your team, market the work that you're doing, sell it. It's a great way not just to grow you, but grow the individuals that are underneath you, because that's part of your job as a leader, to grow them. And marketing is important internally, even within your company.
I couldn't agree more. The biggest failure mode for marketing for sales in tech businesses is thinking that the buyers are like you, that they're motivated by the things that you're motivated by, that they care about features, not results and benefits and outcomes of the technology. The person in the mirror is not your customer, and marketing will help you understand that. But that's a whole other conversation, right?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's been a delight, John. Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.